Baseball is a game, the game, in which mind matters most, and therefore the more you know, the more you enjoy it. Red Smith said, baseball is dull only to the dull.
Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and baseball fan George Will. Today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Well, tomorrow is a big day if you're a baseball fan. It's opening day. It is the only day of the Major League season when every team is in first place, every batter is batting 1,000, and every pitcher has a 0.00 ERA. Well, a few years back, George Will wanted to write a baseball book. And he wanted to explore the reasons why baseball is such an intriguing sport, a complicated and intellectual sport. So he went straight to the experts. Cal Ripken, Tony Gwynn, Tony La Russa, Orel Hershiser. And what he found was not just a deep well of talent, but an incredible, extraordinary ability by the best players and the best managers to synthesize huge amounts of information in real time. And the result was George Will's 1990 book called Men at Work. He and I met that spring, just a few weeks into the 1990 baseball season, to talk about it. In just a moment, our conversation.
Over a 30-year span, national radio personality Bill Thompson did over 10,000 interviews with people who had a hand in shaping our culture and our society. Here is one of those interviews. Enjoy.
So here now, from 1990, George Will.
Isn't baseball a game that a bunch of guys just go out there and have fun, and they hit the ball around for a while, have a bottle of pop afterwards, and do it again the next day?
It ain't pop. It is fun, but it's not relaxed and casual. Never was, and is today less so than ever. Today it is men. I didn't write a book about the boys of summer or the boys of any other season. These are men, and it is work. And it's a better product today than ever before, baseball is. That's why 55 million people pay to get into the stadiums last year. That's why they've broken attendance records 5 years in a row. That's why CBS Television is willing to pay $1 million an inning. That's what its new contract comes out to. That's $130,000 and out, by the way, because the product is very good. And the product is very good because it's an information-intensive game. It's a game that's subject to analysis. That's why a lot of writers like to write about it. And it is progressive in the sense that there's more to know, more to learn, and it gets better every year.
Yet the perception, I guess I should say, among devotees of other sports, particularly basketball, I find, is that baseball is a slow sport, that you can walk out of the room, you come back in, and it hasn't changed.
It's slow and dull. Those are criticisms of it. And frankly, I wrote this book not only to get to know more myself. I don't write to say what I know. I write to get to know things. I wanted to enhance my understanding of baseball because baseball is a game, the game, in which mind matters most. And therefore, the more you know, the more you enjoy it. And I wanted to make this enjoyment more accessible to other people. It's really my way of thanking baseball for thousands of hours of great pleasure. But let me deal with the dull, slow question. Red Smith, the late wonderful sports writer, said, baseball is dull only to the dull. Well, that's a sort of aggressive way of putting it. A nicer way to put it is just what I said, which is the more you know, the more you enjoy. And the more you know about, take defense. I wrote a chapter on Cal Ripken playing shortstop. It's my favorite chapter because defense is such a neglected portion of the game and unbelievably complicated. I had no understanding till I got into this. The more you know about the amount of information Cal Ripken is processing, pitch by pitch, information about his pitcher, what his pitcher's doing that day, the pattern of the hitter with the hitter's expectations, all the rest, the situation in the count, in the inning, in the game. The more you understand all the information being processed, you come away from the ballpark thinking not that it's slow, but how fast it goes. There's so little time for all the players to make all the calibrations, calculations, and adjustments.
They're not just standing out there wondering what they're going to do after the game.
Look, there are some. We have dim-witted dentists, dim-witted lawyers in this country, dim-witted, I emphasize, journalists. But the good ball players, the ones who rise to the level of excellence, and frankly what I've written is a book about excellence. It is about the price four individuals will pay to be the best. And the people who will pay that price are thinking all the time.
Did the way you divided the book, manager, pitcher, batter, and defense, did that just logically jump out at you and say, this is the way the book must be written?
That's right. I wanted to box the compass of baseball to do the structure of the game.
I was wondering why you didn't include the fifth group of umpires.
Well, it's a good question. There are two things I sort of wish I'd done. One is the umpires, because it's a wonderful phrase in the rule book. It says the umpire is responsible for the conduct of the game. And there's an amazing amount goes into that. Amazing amount. In fact, I think there's a book in umpires someday. Maybe I'll get back to baseball that way. I also wanted to do a catcher, because that's but there weren't very many good I started this 3 years ago. And there were only two good catchers around, Carlton Fisk and Bob Boone, and I said, surely both of them will be retired by the time the book comes out. Those guys aren't never going to retire, so I could have done them.
I had heard it said, though, that when you mentioned catchers, that they are essentially the quarterback of the baseball team. And the book that I had read recently was talking about racism that still exists in sports and why there are so few black catchers.
It's a good question. There have been some great ones. I mean, I think the greatest catcher was a white guy from Oklahoma named Johnny Bench. The second greatest, I think, of all time was Roy Campanella, who might have been the best if he hadn't been kept out of baseball because Jackie Robinson had to come first. I don't believe there's racism involved. Earl Batty, John Roseborough. There have been some good black catchers, and right now, some of the very best are Hispanics. I mean, some people will, if you want to get sociological, they'll say that the immigrants are now doing the heavy work again. I mean, Sandy Alomar, Benito Santiago, people like this. It is a tremendously important position. It's ironic that this important position the man plays in foul territory, but he has the whole game arrayed in front of him. He's in on the initiation of every pitch, which initiates all the action.
The first thing that struck me when I went to a real game, as opposed to watching one on television, was that you cannot watch more than one thing at a time. On television, they're very good at cutting to whatever angle you need to see where the ball is, who's doing what. They can split the screen if they have to. But when you're there, unless you got a darn good seat, which I've never been able to get, you have to watch either the batter as he lays the bunt down and runs down the first baseline, or the third baseman running in to get the ball, or the pitcher coming over to cover. You can't see all of that at once.
Well, it's very hard. And in fact, football is made for television. It has compact action. Baseball's charm, really, properly understood, is that it is so spatially separate. All the players are apart, so every action is observable. Now, you do have the problem you point to, which is what do you look at? Well, you'd begin to develop the skill, and it's a learned skill of watching baseball. Again, I've written a sort of guidebook here. In fact, I likened writing my book to the process of a novice, which I certainly was, being taken through an art museum by a very good art critic. We're both looking at the same canvas, the same oil on canvas, but he, in an important sense, is seeing things that I'm not seeing, and I wanted to help people see.
Well, you being one of the nation's foremost baseball fans, and an acutely intelligent one being a Cubs fan at that, do you need to be a fan to write a book like this? Could you have written this book if you hated baseball?
No, I think there are a lot of things in life you have to love in order to do it all well. Surgery. If you don't want to be a doctor, you better not go to medical school. I think people do well that which they love. When you get the closest possible congruence between work and play, between vocation and avocation. And that, by the way, is part of the real charm of professional athletics. It has its drawbacks, lots of them. But it is a place where people are doing what they want to do, what they love to do. There's a lot of talk about how much money they're making. They all like the money, and they fight very hard to get it. A lot of them would play for a lot less.
Why is baseball still America's pastime?
I think several reasons. It is so woven into our past. We're still a reasonably young nation, but baseball's been here about as long as the nation. There is a reference to baseball as two words, which, by the way, is the way it was written well into this century. There's a reference to baseball in the diaries of a soldier at Valley Forge. It's been around a long time. A reference to something like that in the diaries of a student at Princeton in the late 18th century. Baseball was not, by the way, invented in Farmer Finney's pasture in the summer of 1839 in Cooperstown. That's good for the Cooperstown Chamber of Commerce, but it is a complete amiable fabrication. In fact, by the way, when Abner Doubleday, who's supposed to have invented it, died, he was a big military man in the Civil War. The New York Times obituary didn't mention baseball. This is a later fabrication. The only thing Abner Doubleday helped start was a Civil War. He was at Fort Sumter commanding artillery for the Union side when the hostilities broke out. So baseball really evolved from a British game of rounders. There were two versions in this country, the Boston version, the New York version. The New York version prevailed.
After this short break, George Will wonders if baseball is straying from what makes it great.
If you've ever wondered where to find the captivating books we discuss on Now I've Heard Everything, wonder no more.
Just tap the link in our show notes or visit our website, heardeverything.com.
Plus, when you purchase through our affiliate links, you're not only diving into great stories, but also supporting this podcast.
And we thank you for your support.
Now back to my 1990 conversation with George Will.
When I go to an NBA game, I have fun. I have just as much fun as when I go to a baseball game, but it's intense.
It's a game of flow, basketball is, but also the people who run the NBA have decided that there should not be a single minute when your eardrums aren't assailed by this sensory blitzkrieg, and I think that's unfortunate. The baseball ambiance is a very important part of it. The late Bart Giamatti was very worried about the ambience in the ballpark, and he meant not only a certain unruliness creeping in, people drinking too much, but he also talked about what he called the NFLization of life, the kind of overbearing sugarcoating of cloying gunk and pageantry and marching bands and baton twirlers and mascots and stuff that detract from the beauty and elegance and professionalism of athletes doing what they do well. I think it is just a real detriment to baseball to clutter up the environment with things that seem to give the quite fallacious message that baseball's not enough. It is enough.
But don't you have to have something to compete with other sports, with movies, with high tech? You can't go to a movie, even an ordinary love story, without seeing special effects. People are tuned to the 3 or 4 second cut in television commercials.
It may be that the MTV generation, kids raised on again, this extreme quickness and noisiness of their entertainment, need that sort of thing. I would hope that baseball would dig its heels in, hold the line, and wean this rising generation back from cacophony to a more sedate, but, as I said, amply fast and engaging enterprise.
How did you choose those to whom you went to research Men at Work?
I wanted all 4 to confirm my thesis, which is that mind matters terribly much in this sport. Tony La Russa. I also wanted, by the way, 4 people who had not been quite so well known outside the community of baseball. Remember, I picked Tony La Russa 2 pennants ago. Orel Hershiser, before his 59 consecutive inning streak that made him intergalactically famous. I picked Tony Gwynn 3 batting titles ago, and Cal Ripken before he became the heart of the 1989 Orioles soap opera. So I picked Tony La Russa, small market, Oakland. He's a lawyer, one of 5 lawyers who've been managers in the Major League. The other 4 are in the Hall of Fame, where I think he is apt to wind up. I picked Tony Gwynn because, look, gosh, he plays in San Diego. He's got Mexico to the south, Japan to the west, a desert to the east, and the Dodgers to the north. No one pays any attention to the poor San Diego Padres. Tony is not only the most liked person in baseball, not only has the most legendary work habits, but he brings an interesting high-tech approach to this with the use of videotapes of all sorts. And frankly, I wanted a black player like Tony to combat what I think is a kind of latent racial bias that we're not even quite aware of. People too ready to say of athletes generally, but I think particularly of black athletes, oh, he's a natural athlete. Natural. Of course, he's a great athlete. They all have wonderful hand-eye coordination. Everyone who gets to the major leagues is a fine athlete. But that's just the start. And to see Tony Gwynn building that muscle memory that goes into hitting a baseball is inspiring. I picked Cal Ripken for an interesting reason. I was in St. Louis, and some Cardinal fans were all over me with truculent questions saying, why didn't you pick our Ozzie Smith of the Cardinals? He's a natural shortstop. I said I didn't pick him because he's a natural shortstop. He's balletic, he's gymnastic, he's quick. He's the classic small, scampering shortstop. Cal Ripken, more than 220 pounds, almost 6'5", biggest man ever to play this middle infield position, has to compensate for a certain shortened range by anticipation, which means by information, which means by thinking. And Oral Hershiser is one of those supremely articulate modern athletes who is going to be a better pitcher in his 30s than he was in his 20s because, again, he is better at piling up the information that is the basis of baseball success.
Is that what separates the superstars and the stars from the mediocre, the utility men who bounce from team to team? Is that those who don't ever quite see, as you pointed out, they're all good athletes, otherwise they wouldn't be in the major leagues. But is it just that they don't pay attention? They don't care to?
Often it's a matter. You use the word caring. It's a passion for excellence. It's just a desire to be the best and stay the best. I'm not saying that anyone who desires it can do it. I'm not saying it's a sufficient condition. I'm saying it's a necessary condition, that desire.
But you can go out there and practice for 6 hours a day, but if you don't have the desire...
I could have practiced. I did practice for 6 hours a day, and I was terrible.
How did you wind up a Cubs fan?
I grew up in central Illinois in the late 40s and early 50s, midway between Chicago and St. Louis. A lot of my friends became Cardinal fans and grew up happy. Well, the Cardinals had athletes, which I thought was cheating. The Cubs were mediocre then and got worse progressively. But baseball was in the air, literally in the air. It was radio sport then. Still the best medium to listen to baseball, precisely because the action doesn't fit a screen, precisely because baseball allows the weaving of a word picture both by its observability and its pace. There were two teams in St. Louis then. The Orioles were the Browns then. So you had four baseball teams in the air, and it captured my imagination.
I read a magazine article the other day that said the Cubs could be the next dynasty.
Well, I shouldn't laugh. I laugh at two things. A, the Cubs dynasty is an oxymoron, like married bachelor, but also, or Lebanese government. But also, there aren't dynasties anymore, precisely because free agency came along and players could move. Now, all the owners, when this happened, said to a man, they said, this is the end of competitive balance. The few rich teams in the big markets will get all the players. They'll go to Chicago or to the coast. I deal with this at length in my book, making my argument in the conclusion that baseball is better than ever, saying we've never had a period of competitive balance like this. You had between 78 and 87, I believe it was, 10 different teams won 10 straight World Series. Now, Oakland has been in 2 World Series. That's rare enough. They've won 1 in a row, and people are already saying it's a dynasty. Let's wait and see.
George Will be 84 in May. You can read his columns in the Washington Post and see him on News Nation. Now, you can get your copy of Men at Work by George Will by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're listening to this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 2006 interview with one of the players mentioned in George Will's book, Cal Ripken.
Most people think that my dad made me a big league ball player by making me work at baseball and standing over me all the time, and actually the opposite was true.
And my 1991 conversation with Hall of Famer Mickey Mantle.
The only pressure I remember out of that year was that going into August, the middle of August, I was ahead of Babe Ruth's record. And I'm thinking, maybe I can hit 61 home runs,
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, this weekend is the 44th anniversary of that assassination attempt aimed at Ronald Reagan. So we'll revisit my 1985 conversation with the Secret Service agent who tackled and subdued John Hinckley Jr. within a millisecond of when he started firing the shots. My conversation with former Secret Service agent Dennis McCarthy.
After I jumped on Hinckley, when I finally grabbed him, the first thing that got my attention was the fact that he didn't struggle. He just went limp, relaxed. Never struggled. It was almost like he gave up.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.